When my father's coffin came home in 1991, the Navy handed my mother a folded flag and told us his body was lost to the sea. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "At least the ocean keeps its secrets." For 30 years, I believed that lie. Until last week when I opened a classified Navy record and saw his signature dated April 2022. That was the moment something in me cracked. Not because my father might still be alive, but because the men who buried him are still breathing. My name is Dr. Eris Thorne, and I've spent my whole life honoring the dead. Now I'm about to find out what it costs to honor the living. The morning it happened felt ordinary enough to be cruel. The air outside the lecture hall was crisp, the kind of cold that smelled faintly of metal and salt from the Chesapeake. Inside my routine never faltered, coffee at 7, lectures by 9, quiet papers piled neatly on my desk. I'd built my life like a checklist, one that kept chaos out and memory buried deep. The stack of declassified Navy files was supposed to be harmless, just archival work for a seminar on duty and sacrifice. Most of it was the same faded language, dates, seals, signatures from men long gone. Then I saw his name, Captain Julian Thorne. The handwriting curved the same way I remembered from every childhood card. The T lifted slightly, almost proud. But this wasn't a birthday note. The page read, Inspection Record, April 2022. For a long minute, the room lost its sound. I kept rereading the date, waiting for logic to arrive. It didn't. The chair scraped back. I found myself walking the halls to Colonel Croft's office, the file trembling in my hand. He read it once, eyes narrowing, then set his cup down with a soft, deliberate tap. Some ghosts should stay buried, Professor. Outside the wind tore through the flagpoles, sharp and cold. That night I lay awake, the image of that signature glowing behind my eyes. If my father hadn't died, then everything I'd believed about honor, about him, about myself, was suddenly up for question, and I wasn't sure which truth would hurt more. The next morning, I went back to the archive room under the excuse of verifying materials for my lecture. The place always felt colder than the rest of the building, but that day the air had a bite to it, as if I'd stepped beneath the surface of the bay itself. Fluorescent lights hummed above my head, flickering now and then. The smell of old paper mixed with rust, like time had been left there too long. The digital catalog showed nothing. The file I'd seen the day before didn't exist on any record, but the paper copy sat neatly on the shelf, marked by a hand stamp, received, no digital trace, no timestamp. Someone had slid it in by hand, hiding it in plain sight. I called Ben, my research assistant, asked him to check the archive backups. An hour later, he sent me a recovered audio fragment from an old magnetic tape. A man's voice, firm, deliberate, alive. Project Callisto complete. Thorne cleared for transfer. My hands shook. I knew that voice. Every breath, every pause. My father. How could a recording from 91 end up in a file dated 3 decades later? And why had Colonel Croft been so quick to warn me off? By nightfall, I was driving toward Eastport, the headlights cutting through mist that looked almost solid. My mother's house waited by the bay, white paint peeling, the smell of salt thick in the air. She greeted me with a careful smile that cracked when I showed her the copied signature. Her fingers trembled as she tore the paper in half. "He made me promise never to search," she whispered. "Don't break what's already buried." I stared at her, the words catching in my throat. "You knew, didn't you? You knew he was alive." She turned toward the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Her voice came soft and uneven. "Your father was a good man, Eris. Good men don't survive secrets." It was the first time I'd ever seen fear in her eyes, not of death, but of the truth itself. I drove back to Annapolis before dawn, my mind spinning so fast it barely stayed inside the lines of the road. I needed proof, something solid, anything that could tell me whether my father had really died. At home, I opened the old family chest and went through envelopes of fading pictures. Then I found one I'd never seen. My father stood beside a man in a Navy uniform, silver stars on his shoulders. The back read, Research Division, March 1992, Fair Winds Harbor, a year after the explosion that supposedly killed him. I recognized the other man, Rear Admiral Elias Vance. His face had appeared in too many Cold War reports I'd taught to forget. I called the Navy's personnel office. They said he'd retired, living quietly in Maine. 2 days later, I was at his doorstep. His house overlooked the Atlantic, shingles dark with moss, the scent of seaweed clinging to every breath. He opened the door with the weary look of someone expecting ghosts. When I showed him the photo, his eyes flickered. That photo wasn't supposed to survive, he said finally, voice low and afraid. I asked if he knew my father. He nodded once. He wasn't lost at sea, Eris. He was lost in orders he refused to obey. The world tilted. My knees felt hollow. What orders? I asked. He looked toward the ocean, hands clasped behind his back. Classified, he said, and dangerous enough that the ocean became safer than the land. Before I left, he handed me a weathered envelope with nothing inside but a single note. Your father found something inside Callisto. If you want the truth, find the key I left in Portland. The word key rang through me like a code. I didn't yet know what door it would open or what it might lock forever. When I turned to go, he called after me, voice trembling like a confession years too late. He wasn't killed, Miss Thorne. He was erased. The words dropped through me like a stone into deep water, and I knew nothing would ever settle again. By late October, Maine had already surrendered to winter. The air carried the sharp scent of salt and rotting wood when I reached Admiral Elias Vance's house again, the one perched above the cliffs like a monument built to regret. He was sitting on the porch when I arrived, wrapped in a wool coat, staring at the ocean with eyes that looked more like confession than defiance. You came back, he said softly when he saw me. I told him I was there for the key he'd mentioned. His movements were deliberate, each one slowed by guilt or age. I couldn't tell which. He led me inside. The walls were lined with ship models, naval charts, and medals, all dulled under a film of dust. Among them hung a photo of him with my father, sunlight glittering off the water behind them. Below the frame was a small brass plate engraved with the words, For truth, not orders. Vance poured himself a drink that trembled in his hand. He said, my father had discovered that one of Callisto's research shipments was no such thing. It carried biological weapons disguised as humanitarian supplies. He'd confronted command, refused to sign off, and they'd told Vance to make him disappear before he made them all burn. The phrase echoed in my head. Us all burn. It wasn't just one man's ruin. It was an entire institution protecting itself. From a drawer, Vance pulled out a small key wrapped in oiled paper. Safe deposit. Portland Dock, number 214. He left it there before the explosion, he murmured. He looked exhausted, as if confession alone could kill him. He trusted you'd find it one day. I'm sorry it took this long. Before I left, he rested his hand on my father's photo. Your father wasn't weak, Eris. He just refused to kill his soul. Driving away from Maine, the words clung to me like fog. A man who refused to kill his soul, and the world buried him for it. Maybe that was what it meant to have honor, to drown with your conscience still intact. Portland Dock smelled of oil and low tide. The storage clerk barely looked up as I handed him the key and the box number. Inside the metal locker was a cassette sealed in wax paper, a handwritten letter, and a family photo. My parents. And me standing in front of the base gate, 1989. My father's handwriting filled the page, bold, certain, alive. If you're reading this, it means the sea never forgave what men tried to hide beneath it. They will call me a traitor, but I chose silence to keep you alive. I sat in the car and slid the cassette into the old player. The tape crackled, then his voice came through, calm and steady, beneath the hiss of surf. I won't sign off on death disguised as duty. Another voice followed, colder, familiar. You're endangering the entire command. Then my father again. No, Thaddeus. You are. Thaddeus. Colonel Valerius Croft. The tape ended with a crash and a man shouting before the sound cut to silence. My hands were numb against the steering wheel. Croft had been there when my father vanished, when the explosion was staged. I drove straight to the base. Croft looked up from his desk as I entered, eyes unreadable. I asked why he told me to stop digging. Because I don't want you to end up like him, he said. You mean dead? Numbered? Erased? He tossed the page with my father's signature back across the desk. You think the Navy wants another martyr? Leave the past where it lies. I stood, met his stare. History doesn't lie. People do. Outside, the corridor hummed with fluorescent light. My phone buzzed. An anonymous email had arrived. If you value your life, stay away from Mariner's Trust. The message was unsigned, but I didn't need a signature this time to know the truth. I was already being watched. Back at Washington Navy Yard, my father's voice from the cassette wouldn't stop echoing in my head. The name Mariner's Trust haunted me, a hidden circle of retired admirals who once ran covert projects during the Cold War. If my father had fought them, he hadn't just defied orders. He had defied the entire order of power itself. Using the clearance code Vance had given me, I entered the classified network. One file appeared. Read the Thorn file. Bury Callisto permanently. The sender, Colonel Croft. His message made my hands go cold. She's getting too close. Ensure the professor's clearance is revoked quietly. My eyes froze on the CC line, S. Thorn. My mother. The screen's light flickered. Then the room went dark. A metallic click followed, the sound of a door locking. I hid behind the file shelves as a shadow passed the frosted glass, tall, broad-shouldered, unmistakably Croft's build. When silence returned, I bolted through the emergency exit. A young guard stopped me near the loading dock, panic in his voice. They're looking for you, ma'am. Mariner's Trust. By the time I reached my car, a black sedan was already following. At a deserted gas station, it stopped behind me. A man left an envelope on my hood and vanished. Inside, you won't find truth in Washington. Look to the shore. Dear Isle. Signed, SV. I drove all night through freezing fog until the bridge to Deer Isle appeared like a scar over the sea. Silas Vane waited at the dock, thin gray eyes clear as winter water. You have your father's stare, he said. In his cabin, maps curled on the walls, dust thick with years. Vane told me the truth. My father had faked his death after uncovering biological weapons hidden under Callisto's research shipments. He's alive, Vane said. Goes by Marcus Holt, fixes boats near the lighthouse. That afternoon, I found the shack. A man with silver hair looked up from a torn net. Eris? His voice cracked the air between us. I couldn't breathe. We sat beside a lantern until dawn. He handed me a leather-wrapped drive. Proof. Dates, names. Once you open it, there's no going back. Before I left, he whispered, honor isn't what you wear, it's what you keep when no one salutes. I stayed on Deer Isle for 3 days. My father, Marcus Holt, the name he'd lived under for 30 years, spoke little and worked endlessly. By day, he fixed boat engines for the fishermen who never asked too many questions. By night, he sat at the edge of the dock, eyes lost in the dark horizon, whispering that the sea forgets the cowards first. On the third evening, he placed the leather drive in my hands. If you open it, you'll be hunted. If you hide it, you'll live. Both choices have prices. His hands were rough and scarred, yet they trembled when he touched the past. You hid because of me, I said. I hid because of them, he answered. You were the only thing left worth protecting. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of diesel. I saw a boat anchored near the pier, its lights off, though its engine idled low. Dad, I whispered. We're not alone. He disappeared inside the shack and returned with an old Colt in his hand. They found us sooner than I hoped. The explosion came before the sentence ended. Fire tore through the dock, flames swallowing the wooden beams faster than thought. The air turned to smoke and heat. We ran through the door, coughing. Dad, the data. It's in the boat. Go. He shoved me toward the edge. I tried to pull him along, but he shook his head. Eris, this is my second death. Let it count for something. The smoke grew thick, his voice fading behind it. Then I heard him once more, calm, resolute, like a man reciting his creed. Honor is the tide, Eris. It always returns. I dove into the freezing water, clutching the leather pouch to my chest. Behind me, the shack blazed like a funeral pyre, the reflection turning the harbor blood red. By the time the fire reached the sky, he was gone, claimed not by the sea this time, but by the truth he had spent his life protecting. 3 weeks later, Washington trembled under the weight of the Callisto files. The hard drive I carried from Deir al had ignited a storm. Every forged document, every illicit transaction, and the recording of Colonel Croft admitting what he'd buried. The Navy Inspector General launched a full investigation. I was summoned back to Annapolis. Croft waited in his old office. No uniform this time, only a white shirt rolled at the sleeves. He looked smaller without the medals. You did it, he said quietly. You burned 30 years of silence. No, I told him. You did. I just lit the match. He studied his hands. You think this brings him back? No, I said softly. But it brings him home. The Academy prepared a ceremony to honor missing officers. On the memorial table stood my father's photograph. Captain Julian Thorne. His name restored, his record cleared. The hall was filled with cadets, veterans, and officers in crisp dress whites. None of them knew I was the one who had opened his grave of silence. When my turn came, I walked to the podium, holding the single page he'd left behind. My voice shook, but didn't break. My father wasn't lost at sea. He was lost in silence. Today, we return him to the tide he never stopped serving. Then I played the old tape. My father's voice filled the hall, firm and unyielding. Service means nothing if it serves lies. No one moved. Then a young officer, Leo Croft, Colonel Croft's son, stood, raised his hand in salute. One by one, the others followed. Not out of command, but out of conscience. From the front row, my mother wept quietly, her face finally unburdened. When I stepped down, she took my hand. He's free now, she whispered. So are we. 3 months later, the world had already moved on, but I hadn't. I'd left my post at the academy, the classroom too small for what silence had taught me. Every morning I returned to the shore of Deir Isle, to the place where my father's shack once stood. The foundation stones still smelled faintly of salt and smoke. The sea didn't grieve. It simply kept what it was given. I bought back his old fishing boat from a man in town, repaired the cracked hull, and renamed it, The Tide Returns. It wasn't elegant, but it was honest, like him. On the morning the paint finally dried, the horizon opened in pale gold. My mother joined me at the dock, holding a worn photograph of the three of us before everything broke apart. Her hair blew wild in the wind, silver catching the sun. We set out at dawn. The bay was calm, the water flat as glass, mirroring our faces, no longer a seeker and a survivor, but two people carrying home what the sea had once taken. I reached into the leather pouch, edges still charred from the fire, and unfolded my father's last letter. Truth doesn't save us, Eris. It just keeps us worth saving. If the world forgets, let the tide remind it. I'll be where honor meets silence. Somewhere in between. His words rippled through me like a prayer. I opened the urn and the ashes drifted from my hand, scattering across the waves like threads of light. The tide took them gently, pulling them outward until they vanished into the horizon. For the first time, the water didn't feel cold. I stood at the bow as the boat rocked softly. My mother's hand found mine, warm and steady. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to explain. The past had burned away, and what remained was clean, a silence that didn't hide, but healed. I started the engine and turned the bow toward open water. Behind us, the island grew smaller, and the sky blushed into the color of forgiveness. The sun dipped into the sea like a wound closing, light meeting water, the way truth meets peace. Honor came back, I whispered. So did peace. And for the first time, I believed it.